On today's episode, Marek Vanacker inks his entry-level contract while Isaak Phillips and Louis Crevier are brought back on one-year deals.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As usual, just a reminder off the top to hit that like button, comment down below, and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, all of which is 100% free, won't cost you anything, and really does help me out tremendously, especially subscribing to the channel as I'm currently on the climb to 2,000 subscribers. That's the best way that you can all show some support. If you're listening through an audio platform, be sure to go and rate and review as well. Those also are greatly appreciated. And last but certainly not least, got to let you all know today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Go and sign up today by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon to get daily boosts and bonuses all summer long. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. I hope you all had yourself a wonderful weekend. Happy Monday. Opening things up here today, a final bit of tidying done by the Blackhawks late last week that I haven't gotten to yet here on the show, as Louis Crevier and Isaak Phillips, the final two RFAs that needed to be taken care of, officially received matching one-year, two-way contracts with a $775,000 AAV. The final bit of tidying with the RFAs has now concluded, and I think both of them make sense. And it's also nice to know both of them being on two-way deals means they will be able to go up and down to Chicago and Rockford if necessary without having to go through waivers. But we've been familiar with both of these two over the last couple of seasons, starting with Isaak Phillips. It feels like he's been here forever, but he was only drafted in 2020. He just ascended to the pro scene so quickly. Drafted as a fifth-round pick in 2020, by the way, has turned out rather nicely for being such a late-round selection. But he actually wound up on the pro scene by the end of his draft year because of COVID. He was slated to play with the Sudbury Wolves of the OHL that season, and the OHL didn't wind up happening. So Phillips ended up just joining the Rockford IceHogs, and that kind of kickstarted his pro career. And then from 2020 to 2023, we saw him mostly with the IceHogs, racked up 142 games there, but did play in 20 NHL games with the Blackhawks in between, mostly as a filler due to injury. But this past season, the Blackhawks were absolutely derailed by injuries, more so than ever since I have been covering this team. And that led to Phillips playing a career-high 33 games in which he tallied 6 assists, but was also a minus 26 in the process. So was a little bit of tough sledding for Isaak Phillips, although I will say he was mostly playing on the third defensive pairing, and there wasn't a whole lot of help there alongside him. And, you know, while I don't ever see Phillips necessarily being a gifted offensive threat or the biggest piece of the puzzle here to this Blackhawks rebuild on their blue line, I mean, he's never been a substantial offensive threat, even in his time in the AHL. He does have a big frame, 6'3", already 210 pounds. Solid defensive defenseman, a decent skater, but also just has a lot of good experience for a kid that I think we forget is only 22 years old. It just feels like he's older because he's been part of the organization for so long. He's not going to turn 23 until next month in September. So I still think he has some decent potential. Like I said, I don't ever think he's going to be like a top 4 piece or anything, but I do think it's worth bringing Isaak Phillips back on this one-year contract to, like a lot of guys for the Blackhawks, kind of figure out exactly what type of player he can be. And we've seen, you know, in the past, not only with the Blackhawks and Gustav Forsling, but with other teams and other defensemen, quitting on them too early has kind of wound up biting them in the butt. So makes sense to bring Phillips back for multiple different reasons. For Louis Crevier, he also was a late round pick in the 2020 NHL draft. Phillips goes in the 5th, Louis Crevier goes in the 7th. And I think that's what's been so natural about this relationship and friendship that they've established over the last couple of years, right? Both didn't really have high aspirations, or at least from an outsider perspective, there weren't like high expectations for them in the Blackhawks organization after being drafted in the later rounds. They go on to be roommates for the Rockford Ice Hogs, establish to be a very good defensive pairing with one another, and now get brought back on matching 1-year, 2-way deals. I thought only made sense, but been pretty cool to see these two as late round selections develop rather nicely for the Blackhawks the last couple of years. Crevier hasn't been on the pro scene for as long as Phillips has. He just made the leap to pro hockey in 2022 after spending 4 years in the QMJHL. His first year at the pro level, he spent entirely with the Rockford Ice Hogs, tallying 6 assists in... 5 assists, in 62 games worth of action. This past year, though, we finally got to see him at the NHL level, like with Phillips, because the Blackhawks were just dealing with so many injuries. That led to Crevier's first NHL call-up, and his first NHL stint actually got off to a really good start, and he wound up tallying 3 assists in 24 games, but that final stretch of his did not wind up going all that well, and he ended up being reassigned back down to Rockford. In all, played in 41 games for them, tallying 3 goals and 8 assists for 11 points. Turned 23 years old back in May, and it's crazy to think that he's actually older than Isaak Phillips is. Just feels like Isaak would naturally be older, again, because of how long he's been on the pro scene with the Blackhawks. But I expect Crevier to be going back to Rockford for this upcoming season. However, there is still a little bit of a glaring hole for the Blackhawks on the right side in terms of right-handed defensemen. It's basically Seth Jones, Connor Murphy, and then Louis Crevier, right? And even down in Rockford, there's a little bit of a need for right-handed defensemen. They do have Artem Levshinov joining them for this upcoming season, more than likely, but I think it would be natural for Crevier to go back to Rockford. He needs a little bit more seasoning before kind of making that leap to the pro level, but I do think he and Isaak Phillips could be in the mix for that 7th defenseman spot for the Blackhawks, although admittedly I do think it naturally fits Isaak Phillips more than Crevier, just given all the experience that Phillips, he's played already over 170 games at the AHL level as a 22-year-old, and he doesn't really have anything left to prove at that level. I've been saying that on this show for a year now, and even though his stint last year in the NHL wasn't that great, I still believe he's worthy of another opportunity. And just given all the youngsters that they want to be giving playing time to down in Rockford, like Levshinov, Del Mastro could be there, Allen's probably going to be there again, Kaiser and Korchinski could both be there, likely one of them is going to be, right? Crevier as well. Like, I think it would make sense to give those guys those opportunities, whereas Phillips doesn't really need them anymore. It's right for him to make that jump and to be a full-time NHLer, even though he might not necessarily have that top 6 spot in the lineup because of the ads of TJ Brody and Alec Martinez that the Blackhawks made this offseason. So we'll see what winds up happening, but I do agree bringing both of these back on 1-year deals only made sense. There are my 2 cents on Louis Crevier and Isaak Phillips signing 1-year deals last week. Coming up in just a moment, I'll discuss Martin Necas re-signing with the Carolina Hurricanes. But first, I got to talk to you all real quick about Indeed. We're driven by a search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search. Match with Indeed. And if you need a hire, you need Indeed, because Indeed is the best matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And one of the things that I personally love about Indeed is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy, because you can skip out on the countless job sites that ask unnecessary information and don't wind up leading you anywhere. So go and join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent in an instant. And listeners of this show, you'll get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility by visiting Indeed.com/lockedon. Again, get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility by visiting Indeed.com/lockedon. Need to hire? Then you need Indeed. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, a quick reminder to help me out, please, by smashing the like button, commenting down below, and subscribing to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Go and comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on whether you think Isaak Phillips should be the seventh defenseman for the Blackhawks this upcoming season, or do you see him potentially squeezing his way in the lineup? Let me know your thoughts down below. And also, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On Sports Today, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On. Plus, we have national shows that cover every single league. So do us a favor, go and check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Segment 2, lots of speculation going down throughout the early portion of the offseason surrounding Carolina Hurricanes star fringe player Martin Necas, and the Blackhawks were reportedly on a couple of different occasions, reportedly kicking the tires to see what the asking price was for Martin Necas, so much so that I even had an entire episode dedicating it. However, those rumors and rumblings finally came to a close last week when the Carolina Hurricanes avoided arbitration by signing Necas to a 2-year contract with a $6.5 million AAV. And there were reports throughout all of this that Necas, on a long-term deal, was wanting potentially $7 to $7.5 million. And if you all remember, if you watched that episode, I scoffed at that price a little bit, particularly with Necas coming off a year in which he had 53 points, right? Like that was just a little bit too much. And I do think he has a lot of upside, but I don't think he's shown enough, or I would be comfortable giving him that type of money at a long-term price. And I kind of think the Carolina Hurricanes were thinking the same thing. However, they certainly weren't going to take less than anything than the ceiling in order to get rid of Martin Necas, apparently, because according to Frank Saravalli of the Daily Faceoff, there were a lot of reports, a lot of offers out there, quality ones, that the Carolina Hurricanes received in exchange for Martin Necas, but they never wound up pulling the trigger on any of them before signing him to this 2-year deal. One of them, apparently even the Carolina Hurricanes agreed to. However, Martin Necas didn't want to sign the contract. That team, Saravalli believes, was the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres and the Canes had a deal done. However, Necas wasn't going to sign a long-term deal with the Sabres, and that was one of the stipulations of the trade. So that ended up falling through, and then Saravalli believes there was also another substantial offer made by the Winnipeg Jets that was believed to be Rutger McGroarty, the 14th overall pick a couple of years ago, Cole Perfetti, who was the 10th overall pick in 2020, the same draft that Louis Crevier and Isaak Phillips went in the later rounds in, as well as a draft pick. Saravalli didn't exactly explain whether it was a high round pick or a late round pick. But regardless, I mean, that's a pretty intriguing offer there for the Hurricanes, especially for a guy who doesn't really sound like he wants to sign a long-term deal here in Carolina, or at least there's some uncomfortability there somewhere in the relationship, or else this long-term deal would have been signed. So to turn down a deal like that from the Winnipeg Jets, who knows if Martin Necas would have been willing to sign a contract extension with them either, is they're a little bit of a dumpster fire at the moment. But Rutger McGroarty, as I mentioned, 14th overall a couple of years ago, had a stellar first couple of years of college hockey with the University of Michigan. I mean, just tore it up along with Frank Nazar this past season to help them reach the Frozen Four. But then the reports surfaced that he didn't want to sign his entry-level deal with the Winnipeg Jets. He's not going to be reporting to their training camp in the fall, and he's returning to Michigan for his junior year, which is just bananas. This guy obviously is ready to make the leap to the next level. Then Perfetti, 10th overall in 2020, been on the NHL scene each of the last 2 years. He tallied 30 points in 51 games during his rookie year, 38 points in 71 games last year. Still very young, still has a lot of room to grow, a lot of good assets working in his favor with the modern day game, even though he is a little bit undersized. Like, those are two pretty intriguing prospects right there. Like, and you could even make an argument that Rucker McGroarty could have gone in the top 10 in the 2022 NHL draft the same year. Frank Nazar went 13th overall. Kevin Korchinski went 7th overall, right? Like, Rucker McGroarty, you can make an argument for that. Plus another draft pick. I don't think it was a first, because if it was a first, I don't know how Carolina says no to it, even though they're standing firm on Martin Necas, and there was that deal with Elias Pettersson that fell through. Like, that's a pretty hefty offer. And even if it's a second, I feel like it was a pretty good offer for Winnipeg. So who knows what went south there, but Martin Necas ends up not getting traded this offseason despite all the rumblings, despite the Blackhawks kicking the tires, despite me doing an episode on it. But I never imagined that he was going to wind up in Chicago. Not at that price tag. I talked about how the moving of assets between the Blackhawks and the Canes for what they wanted and what I think the Blackhawks would be willing to give up, it didn't exactly match. So I always thought it was a long shot for the Hawks to acquire Marty Necas, but who knows? I have a feeling in a year and a half, when Necas is at the end of his bridge deal that he just signed with the Canes, there are going to be a lot of discussions around him once again, and that's what makes me wonder why the Canes didn't end up pulling the trigger on an offer like that from the Winnipeg Jets. But who knows? Marty Necas not winding up in Chicago, though. That's what we know. But there are my thoughts on him inking a 2-year deal with the Carolina Hurricanes. Coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, don't go anywhere, because before I wrap things up, I'm going to talk about the 2024 24th overall pick, Marek Vanacker, inking his entry-level contract earlier this morning. But first, I got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But unfortunately, we're at the dead point of the summer, sports fans, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. However, FanDuel allows me to keep the sports going whenever I want, wherever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every single day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and make the most out of your summer by getting daily boosts and bonuses. Again, that's FanDuel.com in order to get daily boosts and bonuses. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Segment 3, early this morning, it was announced that Blackhawks 2024 first-round pick, the third selection they made in the first round of the 2024 NHL Draft, Marek Vanacker, has officially signed his 3-year entry-level deal with the team, getting that piece of business taken care of early and getting it done with right away. A $975,000 AAV, by the way, for those who are wondering. And also for those who are wondering, no, this does not mean that Marek Vanacker is making the leap to pro hockey for this upcoming season. But he is a member of a junior team, whereas opposed to a college team. If you sign your ELC when you're in college, that means you are making the leap to the pro scene. If you're in junior hockey, that doesn't mean you are. You are still allowed to report to your junior club. You're not eligible to play in the AHL until you're over 20 years of age. However, Marek Vanacker is allowed to go back to junior because he plays in the OHL with the Brantford Bulldogs alongside Nick Lardis. And boy, what a year Marek Vanacker had last year as the leading scorer of the Bulldogs, taking advantage of a huge opportunity for him while Nick Lardis was actually out of the lineup. He jumped into the top 6 and really capitalized, scoring 36 goals, adding 36 assists, 82 points. What would that be? My math is off. I forget. I apologize for writing the stats down wrong. Regardless, he had 82 points in 68 games this past year as the leading scorer of the Brantford Bulldogs, where he stepped up with Nick Lardis out of the lineup. Also chipped in for 3 goals and 4 assists, 7 points in 6 games in the OHL playoffs before the Bulldogs got eliminated. So he had a really outstanding season, and that's what led to his draft stock rising so high and ultimately him being selected in the first round round by the Blackhawks, where they traded with the Carolina Hurricanes to get back in the first round and pick Vanacker. I know a lot of people had a problem with that pick. Honestly, at this point in the draft, it's a little bit of a toss-up. It's a little bit of that point where we're going to see how things work out in a couple of years. And as I've said time and time again, I believe because of the buzz around Marek Vanacker, I was hearing about it from multiple different scouts and analysts leading up to the draft. I firmly believe that even though he had a torn labrum, someone, because of the type of the year he had, his makeup, his well-rounded offensive game with good skating, playmaking, and an uptick in goal scoring this past year, someone was going to take a chance on him in the first round. I really didn't have a problem with that. I also didn't because, yeah, some people were like, why didn't the Blackhawks keep all those second-round picks? At this point, we're thinking quality over quantity. We have quantity. We need quality at this point in time. So I understand getting rid of some of those seconds to move up and take a chance on a guy who I think has a high ceiling and plays a game that will translate well to the NHL level whenever that time is. So I think it made sense to take Marek Vanacker at number 24. That's a different conversation, though. However, we do know Vanacker, like I said, he's going to be returning to the Brantford Bulldogs this upcoming season, and it is going to be fun to watch him alongside Nick Lardis. Those two are going to be a dynamic duo in the top six for Brantford, potentially even on the same line together as both of them are wings. They're going to be on the top power play unit, dishing it to one another. The Bulldogs are going to be must-see TV for Blackhawks fans in the OHL, particularly also considering what we saw Nick Lardis do when he was healthy with Brantford last year. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm sure those two are going to be putting up eye-popping offensive numbers, and they even both have a chance of being part of the leadership team. We could even be seeing them wear letters for the Brantford Bulldogs this upcoming year, which is, again, another great experience for them at a young age. And quite honestly, even though Vanacker is a year younger than Nick Lardis and is in a draft class behind him, if they both go on to have smashing seasons, I wouldn't be surprised to see both of them make the leap to pro hockey with one another. I think that would be kind of a fitting part of their relationship for them to take that next step alongside one another. I think that would be a cool little tidbit to throw in there. However, we do know that Vanacker is going to miss the early portion of this upcoming OHL season as he still is rehabbing from that torn labrum that he played through last year, which makes his ascension and the numbers that he put up, leading the Bulldogs in all major categories, even more impressive. But he did have to go and get that fixed up. He underwent shoulder surgery in June. He's going to be rehabbing that for the next 4 to 6 months. That's the timeline that he was put on. So I'd expect him to return skating sometime in mid to late November, early to mid-December, sometime around there as we start to creep into the holidays. So that's unfortunately going to cost him a decent chunk of the season, but if he returns and gets healthy and things go well for him, the Bulldogs should be a good team this upcoming year. If he shows good things in the OHL playoffs, I would not be surprised to see Vanacker and Nick Lardis make that leap to pro hockey and playing for the Rockford Ice Hogs in what? That would be the 2025-2026 campaign. It's all about the future here for the Chicago Blackhawks. And there are going to be a lot of prospects that are going to be fun to watch from afar here in Chicago and from wherever you may be a Blackhawks fan and supporting this team from. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. From me to you, wherever you may be as a fan of the Blackhawks, let me just say thank you very much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube to help support this channel. Currently on the climb to 2,000 subscribers. I would love to hit that before the end of the season. If you're tuning in on an audio platform as well and you haven't done so already, even if you're a regular listener of the show, please be sure to go and subscribe on YouTube. It won't cost you anything. And same for everyone who's watching on YouTube. If you occasionally listen to podcasts every now and then and you're not able to watch the video version while you're at work or something along those lines, be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free as well, wherever you may be listening to your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever it may be. It greatly helps support the show. Also puts a great smile on my face. You can also check me out personally at Jack Bushman 2 on X. Follow Locked On Blackhawks on X as well. I'm actually closing into 2,000 subscribers there. My strictly Blackhawks account on X is at Talkin' Hockey. Go and give that a follow for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until the next episode, which will be coming out on Wednesday, don't forget, Locked On down to 3 episodes per week here for the month of August, as we're kind of in the dead point of the NHL offseason. Until the next episode, everyone enjoy the rest of your days. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team